Welcome to all.
So I'm here to talk about genealogy. If you've heard my talks before, they've been on photography. So this is going sideways, sort of, from the world of photography into something that I've worked on for a long time. So in talking a little bit with another lady who's on here named Jodine, she helped me with this title, and I really like this title, River of Time You're Literally Standing on the Shores of. Family is huge. I grew up in Alpena County. I was born at the Alpena General Hospital. I started in a one-room school with a bell like you see in the picture. Went to Long Rapids, Thunder Bay, Besser, Alpena High, graduated in 1971, and went to Michigan Tech for a year, and then I finished up some more formal education a few years ago down here in the Ann Arbor area where I live now, at Washtenaw Community College and Concordia University. I want to open with this thought, and that's, some of you have heard this before, I'm sure. A lot of times you'll hear this at a funeral, or you'll see it posted at places like the McWilliams Funeral Home. I ran into this at the Hallmark store before I ever saw it in a funeral context, but it just stuck from the time I saw it. And so I put this excerpt here. It's from The Dash by Linda Ellis. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on her tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of her birth and spoke of the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all time, and it goes on, and I encourage you to, you can buy a book, you can go into the McWilliams Funeral Home. Wayne probably still has it mounted in there. But that dash is pretty important to me, because whether there's 5 on this call today, or there were 50 or 100, we're all living that dash right now. And that's our life. So I open with that thought. We're at an interesting time, and sort of standing on the banks of the river, if you look at it that way. I've lost 5 family members in the last 5 months. And yesterday I started at another free fall because I thought maybe I'm losing another one, but now I understand a little better that it was surgery, and I think things are going to be okay. But this isolation thing that we're going through right now, call it COVID, has really thrown a lot of challenges. It's created new challenges our way, and in the case of the 5 family members I've lost, 2 of them were to COVID. It's really hard, and so I suspect that your story may well be the same. But I also think this is teaching us, and this isolation, it's teaching us some things about the importance of families. And we do a lot of things in a day's time, and a lot of us miss out on a lot of the richness that's alive and really quite well in our families. So as we look at the river, I think we can reflect a little bit. How did I get started in genealogy? You know, as I thought about this, I don't think I saw it coming. And when I think about it further, I think it could go all the way back to the fact that I lived upstairs from my great-grandmother for almost 13 years. You see her sitting at the spinning wheel in that picture, and really over time I've uncovered this other picture, which I really like, of her sitting on a tractor with my dad. I doubt that she was driving the tractor, doing anything that was farm related, but somehow Dad got her up on the tractor, and I really like the picture. My grandparents lived next door, so I saw them. Well, I saw Grandma almost every day. Grandpa was a captain on the Great Lakes, so 9 months out of 12, I didn't have Grandpa there. But I really got to know Grandma well, but then Grandma would take me to the boat, and I really got to know Grandpa well. And then mom's parents lived in Alpena. And so we would go down there and visit every Sunday. And in some ways I thought, gosh, we got to go visit again this Sunday. And, you know, I lost them when I was 7 and 10 years old is when I lost those grandparents. So I didn't get to know them as well. But through that relationship, I was, I think, starting to develop some of the things that were going to come into play as I got older. So I think that's probably the roots. Formally, in the 1980s, I talked with a lady who did a lot of genealogy for our family. She was part of our family. And she warned me, she said, you know, if you're really interested in this, it's addictive. It could be addictive. That didn't seem to scare me away. I went to a Radio Shack store and bought a computer that had floppy drives. I don't think it had any hard disk. Why on earth would we need that? And then I got some software. I didn't have a lot of money, so I looked around and I found a personal ancestral file, which was out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and loaded that up on the computer. And I began to enter names. I didn't use the Underwood typewriter. That's my grandma's typewriter. And so that's how I started. Now, you know, why should anybody in this call do this? And I believe that you will find it'll open a special door. This is one of my grandkids opening this door in this old stove at Greenfield Village, or trying to open it. But I think you will open a special door. I think you'll find some really great history. I think while you will encounter some challenges along the way, family challenges, you'll understand maybe some of the challenges better than you ever did before. And, you know, I'm speaking to the lifelong learners, so it'd be easy to say we're all older. We don't have to be older, but it's important that we have a lot of brain activity. And I really think it fits that category. So we start by touching the river. I took this picture a few weeks ago on the Detroit River, and this is not in the order that I did this, but I think it makes sense. You find a computer with spreadsheet software. Some people will say, well, I don't have a computer, or I have a computer, but I don't have spreadsheet software. And this is where I encourage you to talk with one of your kids or to talk with grandchildren, a friend, somebody that's got spreadsheet software, and build a timeline of your life. I did this a few years ago, and I have quite a lengthy timeline built at this point. But and so what do you enter? Well, if you're over 60 years old, you've got 60 entries right away because you were born and you've had 60 birthdays. And then enter some anniversaries, enter some history. Maybe you were baptized. Your parents maybe had a 50th wedding anniversary. You graduated from high school. Maybe you remember when you got your first job. Maybe, unfortunately, like me, you don't have your parents anymore, so they've passed away, so those become entries. But you build this timeline. It doesn't mean you have to go out into the public and talk to anybody. This can all be done at that computer. If you don't have spreadsheet software, you don't want to understand it, and you have a chance to do this with a grandchild or a child, it may be some very valuable visiting that you do with that selected person. But begin to enter this or build this timeline, I should say. And if you're building as a team, husband and wife, put some sort of a designator out there by each entry to indicate that that entry belongs to you or to your significant other, so that you could sort it later on if you want to sort it. But I think this is it's sort of a simple way maybe to sort of build a biographical sketch of your life. And, you know, I haven't done everything right in life. So I have some things on my timeline that I'm not exactly excited about, but I have a lot of things that I am excited about. And it just kind of shows how we grow. I went out and I now know that the Detroit Tigers lost their game on the day that I was born. And That doesn't bother me too much because I know that another name, famous Ted Williams, hit the home run that won that game. So while you're building the timeline, feel free to grab a bench and think about things a little bit. Think about what this timeline is doing, and reflect a little bit. See how it feels. See if it feels like you want to go further than a timeline of your life. Think about your dash. Think about where you were a week ago and where you are today. And just start to mill these things over a little bit. The spreadsheet you will continue to build and build and build and build. Once you make the entries, that's fine. You just add more entries to it. But now you get to a decision point. You can choose to walk on the river a little bit. Do I go from a timeline to a family tree? One thing you need to remember is that you are the teacher and you are the student. And that's pretty convenient. So you can create the assignments. You can fail at the assignments miserably. You can talk to the teacher. You can redesign the assignment. You can redesign the class. You can drop the class if you want to. That's all up to you because you're the teacher and the student. You do as much as you want to do. So assuming you want to go on and work with your family tree, you start with your immediate family. There are some softwares out there. Ancestry.com is one. MyHeritage.com is another one. Family Tree Maker, Roots Magic. I don't use any of those. So, and I'm not saying that because I'm against any of them. I still use my original package, which is actually not supported anymore, which might seem kind of crazy on my part, but I have imported data into some of these other products and choose to work in the direction I'm working right now. But you get a family tree software, you get it loaded up on your computer so that you can enter your mom and your dad and your kids and you or your grandparents. It becomes a collection point. And so if all you do is work with your immediate family, so you take the knowledge you have right now. A family Bible is typically a source. It might look like this one that I pulled off of my shelf, which has no names written in it. But sometimes you'll find names written in there. Sometimes it'll be a document that maybe your grandparents had. It'll have some information in there that you can use to build this family tree software entries or build your entries. And that's really a good starting point. And then, you know, we keep the river in mind. The rivers can be really busy. They can be really quiet. In the morning, they will receive light in a very special, warm way. And if you decide that you want to go beyond your immediate family, or maybe even in your immediate family, you may choose to visit with your family a little bit about what you're doing. And because you have this software building, you can throw these thoughts or documents or whatever you have, you can throw them into the appropriate places in your software. Family reunions become a place that you will link up with family. And you really, I think you will find that getting to know the family better is really rich. I use social media a fair amount. I use Facebook, I use Messenger. I don't use Facebook groups, but I know one of my families does use Facebook groups as a place for, they use it in a private manner so that they can post pictures and talk about things back and forth. Facebook has a lot of pros and cons to it, but I do use Facebook as a way for me to reach out to family that I would not normally be reaching out to because I wouldn't have any way to do it. And so I start by touching the water, so to speak, by sending a messenger message to the family, and we'll see if there's any conversation there and go from there. go upstream, downstream, we can go all different directions. As you start to build your family tree, there's a lot of information out there. I'll refer to the Alpena News. I've used the Alpena News many times. City directories, I have pictures of some of my city directories here. Funeral homes have really, really, really done a great job of developing obituaries. And so frequently I will go to the funeral home to maybe get a better understanding, maybe look for a maiden name, look for some information that may not have been in the newspaper. And libraries, of course, are also an important source of information. You know, and probably for those four that I mentioned right there, you could probably mention four more instantly that I'm not considering. High school yearbooks. You see a copy of one of mine from Alpena High School now over 50 years ago. Maps are important. I don't have a really large picture of this map, but this is an old map when US 23 used to go west out of Alpena and then go north through Long Rapids. Actually used to go by my farm. I thought it was always M65, but for a while it was M60, it was US 23. You don't see a US 23 going by Grand Lake and eventually reaching Rogers City. So you will begin to look at materials in a different way as you look at your family. Like I said, I don't remember US 23 going by my farm, but I'm sure my dad did, and my grandparents, and so on and so forth. There's all kinds of books out there. I don't use this as a benchmark, but the dummies people seem to come up with a lot of stuff along the ways, and sure enough, there is a genealogy online for dummies. Putting this talk together, I happened to walk over to my bookshelf here, and there it was sitting there on the shelf. So I thought, well, I ought to include that picture. The Northeast Michigan Genealogical Society is alive and well up in Alpena. They've done some really good publications. I picture one of them here, the Alpena County Sesquicentennial History Families between 1857 and 2007. That had to have been a lot of work. I sit down at that book frequently and take a look through there, and there's just a wealth of information in there. And I've sort of been urging them to publish an addendum to it, but I know how much work it is, and I don't know if it'll happen or not, but they've done that kind of work. You see death entries in Alpena, Michigan newspapers. Sounds maybe a little morbid, but if you're a researcher, knowing what Alpena News the obituary was in gives you a big heads up as far as what to do next. And for me, that would be spending some time at the George Fletcher at the Alpena Public Library, or I've also been at the Alpena Courthouse. I've been in the vaults at the Alpena Courthouse looking at some very ancient records. But they did a series of these books. You see volume 8 here. I think they did the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, or the 70s, 80s, and the early 90s, something like that. But it gives you all these names, in some cases maiden names, but it tells you the newspaper that the obituary was in. There's also some books up there. Haltiner is a relatively well-known name of somebody that wrote books. I believe he wrote this book, The Town That Went to War. Doing research, I found pictures of my godmother in that book. I found some other cousins in that book. So if you look around, there are other Alpena books. I couldn't put my hands on them here, but and maybe I don't have them, I'm not sure. But anyway, you have in the Alpena Public Library, they have a really great section set aside. And I know there's some reconstruction going on right now, so I don't know what the eventual plan is for everything, but they have some really great resources there in terms of people and materials. Sometimes we have to remove river overgrowth. And I have pictures here of a plat book that I have in my home from 1903. And a picture of the Long Rapids, part of the Long Rapids section of that. It's probably a lot of people have seen this. It's a really large plat book. covers multiple counties. But it's fun to go back and look at the names from back then and compare them to current plat books. And these are types of things that you'll be doing if you really delve into doing research on who owned property before your parents perhaps owned the property, or maybe who owns it today. Cemeteries are very useful. I've been in and out of any number of cemeteries. And the Northeast Michigan Genealogical Society has done I think they put together some books on the cemeteries up in Alpena County. The former housemaster of the Alpena High School, Stanley Beck, did some work on this years and years and years ago. But you know, when you do a study like this, unfortunately, people pass away all the time. And of course, that becomes outdated pretty quickly if somebody's not keeping it up. There's also a Find a Grave website. I don't know if any of you have gone out to the Find a Grave website, but it's actually pretty thorough. And you can go out there and look around and compare notes. Sometimes in the river, you'll see an island. Sometimes beyond that island, there's things like old chests. Picture that I have off to the right here. This is a picture of the play from the Alpena High School in 1942 when my dad was going to high school. But I was given this chest this year, actually, and I've been going through it. Some of the materials in there have been amazing finds. Could easily have just been thrown in a trash bin and never looked at. I have a stack of red books here. My grandfather being a captain on the Great Lakes, the red book is a significant way to get captains' names and chief engineers' names on the boats. So every one of these books you see here has my grandfather's name in it. So that's an example of a specific collection. One day when I was at the Alpena Library, my sixth grade teacher was Mrs. Catherine Herron in Long Rapids. And I think there's a collection of letters that her husband wrote back from the war, I believe, as part of the Alpena County Library. Sometimes you check the current a little bit. You'll run into family artifacts. In this chest I just mentioned, I ran into this Western Union telegram, which was coming to my grandfather up in Alpena County, telling him to report to the master, or report as captain of the Hemlock in South Chicago. That was back in 1944. I have a picture of one of his hats, which I have here at home. And I had always seen this picture of this bride and her great-grandparents. So one day I had the bride here, my aunt, and I thought, I'm going to take a picture of her holding that picture. So she's looking at herself as the bride, and she's looking into the faces of great-grandma and great-grandpa. And so sometimes you can take pictures that you have in your home, and you can take advantage of that picture and take advantage of maybe one of the people in the picture, maybe every one of them, and take a picture like this. There's always findings along the way, which have always been intriguing. And just a few of the findings that I've encountered along the way. I recorded my dad a lot. He had a lot of stories to tell. And so I recorded him one day, and he was talking about my great-grandma and my great-grandpa walking up the hill. It's one of my favorite pictures of my great-grandma and great-grandpa. And he said they were coming to their 50th wedding anniversary, coming to the party. And the party happened to be on the slab of concrete that was next to my grandparents' home. It wasn't a garage yet. And Dad said, we had a dance there. And I thought, well, what's the deal with the dance? And he said, no, we had a dance there. I said, what'd you use for music? And he said, well, we used the car radio. Well, why not? So when you start looking at these things, understand that you're gonna get some nuggets, if you want to call them that. Some really special things are going to surface in conversations you have. I just found out in the last year that my dad had piano lessons. My parents gave me piano lessons when I was very young, and I always figured Mom was the driving force behind that, and maybe she was, but I've never seen my dad sit at a piano in my life. And I found out in talking to one of my cousins that he used to take her to her piano lesson, and before her piano lesson, he had his piano lesson. And I thought, well, that's a fun find. In talking to the director of the Michigan Marching Band a few years ago, I found out that my great uncle was the only married man in his band in 1935. He also went on to tell me he pulled a wagon to band practice and he mowed lawns on the way home to make money. The pews in the church. I found it interesting in talking to my dad one day because I knew that both my great grandparents not only lived almost across the road from each other, but they went to the same church. But Dad said they sat on different sides of the church. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. We always sat on the north side of the church. But then Dad said, well, he said when Grandpa would be sailing, we would sit on the south side of the church with great grandpa and my mom's parents. And then when Grandpa came home from sailing, we would go over on the other side of the church and sit with his parents. And we would flip-flop back and forth. The stories. A tub of pictures. I was at my uncle's place one day and he said, well, I've got some pictures I'd like to show you. And of course, I'm expecting a photo album to come out or something pretty organized. And he comes out with this tub of pictures. He said, I keep this under my bed. And it's just a tub full of pictures. But and looking at those pictures, I ran into a picture of the first school bus I rode on when I went to my one-room school, among other things. And so, you know, you never know what's going to come up in a visit. I was thumbing through an old Alpena news that, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like my parents had every Alpena news in their basement. They didn't. They just happened to have a couple up there. And I happened to be going through there one day and I noticed in the late 1919 or 1918 or something like that, my grandmother sang in a trio. And that was really important to me because this guy who was in the Michigan Marching Band was her brother. He was an important part of Interlochen. You'll see his picture hanging up in Interlochen. He had a lot of music background, as did his brother. And I never really could tie any music to grandma. And so here, just going through, if you go to your Alpena news, probably even today, you'll find 5 years ago and 10 years ago and 50 years ago, it was in that little section that I found a reference to my great grandma or my grandma and singing in a trio. So, you know, prepare yourself in these kinds of things. There's any number of examples that I could go into, and there will be examples as you go. If you choose to take this journey, there will be this similar examples. It'll be just like that river. There'll be something that maybe you can see a little bit, but you can't see it as well as you'd like to see it. So maybe you have to do a little bit of research to get in there, and then off to the right, you'll see some things under the water that are hidden a little more. Again, remember that all the way along here, you're the teacher, you're the student. You can get yourself really involved in stuff. I happen to be one of those people that's really involved, but you don't have to take it to that extent. You can get a lot of good information, a lot of valuable information that you'll always be happy you had, and it could just be with your immediate family. You can do newsletters, you can do books. The books you see here, Harvey and Jenny and Bob and Wanda, those are books that my late wife wrote for my, I think she wrote both of them maybe the year before cancer was discovered in her brain. And so the timing was perfect. You see a picture of my mom looking at the Harvey and Jenny one. She died 2 months later. So the timing of these things can sometimes be a little eerie. I think, you know, when I think about expectations from this, I believe if you start to look at your family, or if you just do your timeline, I believe you'll be happier. I think you'll like a lot of the things you see. And granted, there will be some things that maybe aren't as much fun to read as other things, but I think you'll maybe see how life moves along. I also believe you'll be excited about expanded family friendships. I wouldn't trade, you know, I've been in communication with Wyoming today and California, communications that I wouldn't normally have. But then I look at pictures like this. This is the 1948 Alpena High School marching band. My mom is in that band. She's in the fourth row, far right. When mom was at the funeral home, a guy came up to me and he said, you know, I played tuba in that band. And it turns out his wife was my kindergarten teacher. And there's a couple other people that I know in this band. But it's pretty special. Not, you know, I am the photographer of the Michigan State Marching Band today, but so it's special from that reason, certainly. But the history of it is incredible. I also believe if you were not really outgoing, you may become so. I look at this picture here as taken at Stoneport. It's because Grandpa, you'll see his captain hat on, it's because he had brought the boat in to load stone. I am the kid in his arms. My mom's parents are to the left of me. My great grandma is to the right of Grandpa, my aunt, and then my mom and dad, and a couple of cousins and her husband. But there's so many generations in this picture. People know that if I see multiple generations, I'm going to suggest you get a picture. And pictures are so important. It's so neat to see. To be in Grandpa's arms is pretty cool, but to have great grandma right next in a normal position, I think she carried her purse everywhere. And then to see my other grandparents, you know, I mean, you can almost see the trend there with her daughter, my grandpa's sister, Esther, is standing next to my great grandmother. You also become an expert on finding and writing on all kinds of paper. You're going to be sitting somewhere, and somebody will say something, and you want to write it down, and you can't find anything. I've written on more napkins. I've written on. I'm sure I've ripped pieces of tablecloth off, probably. You'll become an expert at finding and writing on all kinds of paper, because now that if you're building a family tree, you've got a place to put things. If you find out that, you know, my grandfather, to the left of me in this picture, he worked for Huron Portland Cement Company. He got one of their 25-year watches. In this tub of things, I found that he might have been in the first group that got those watches. I haven't been able to confirm that yet, but it's sort of on my list. So now you've got a place to put some of this information. And as I mentioned earlier, your brain needs exercise. And this is a great way to get it. So where am I on this river today? Well, I work on my database every day. Maybe I do skip a day or two here and there, but I have a database that covers multiple counties, a lot of Alpena. I'm in and out of Alpena news almost every day. I guess you could say that I hit the addictive side of things, but I sort of hit it with a lot of energy. I can visit with people and just enrich where I'm at today, because they'll bring something to the table that I didn't know. My visits continue family-wide. I do weekly family newsletters. Some people say, you know, call me crazy, but I do weekly family newsletters. I use a company to handle the mailing of them, but I send family newsletters to over 200 people every week. I'm looking now into Zoom calls as if I didn't have enough things going on. And I know a lot of people don't like Zoom, but we haven't had family reunions for a couple of years now, well, we didn't have it last year, and I'm not sure we'll have it this year because of COVID. And I really feel there's a need. There's a real need out there for people to see faces, at least. And as is the case with all of these talks, I do this in memory of my wife. You'll see her high school picture, and then you see a picture of her a couple of years ago on her 25th wedding anniversary at the Peony Gardens in Ann Arbor. She was a psychologist who worked with brain injuries, and then she got a glioblastoma brain tumor. She loved families. a lot of times when you blend families together, she and I were both married twice before our marriage. It doesn't work well, but she was an ace at it. And she would question why I do all this work, but she never said it was a bad idea. And so maybe there was a lesson there. But she brought a lot to the table. And so I do all these talks so far anyway. I've done them all in memory of her. And that's pretty much it.
Huh. I feel so sorry for the people that missed this.
Well, it's being recorded.
Oh yeah, I made sure that. You won't let me forget that one.
A lot of people do come back and watch after the fact, you know, you can be guaranteed of that.
Yes, yeah.
I'm glad it's under an hour because I tried to put this thing together. I could talk forever. I have this thing that came along with my dad, I guess, when I was born. It's like, oh, great, I'm going to be like my dad. There's so much richness out there. You know, one of those 5 people that I was just at a funeral for, I've had some great conversations with his granddaughter in the last couple of weeks out of Texas, because she's trying to understand this family that used to be the lady that lived downstairs from me and I would see every day. She has no idea who that lady was. And so now it's, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to do this. And so I kind of battle that a little bit, but these family newsletters, of course, I use that as a mechanism to reach family. And I have a database here that has zillions of pictures in it. I am a photographer, and you know, I've taken a lot of pictures and scanned a lot of pictures and copied a lot of pictures and that kind of thing. But I think it's worth your time. Like I said, if for no other reason, you build a timeline of your life. You gain some understanding of who you are. I got my bachelor's degree when I was in my early 50s, and I wouldn't trade that late education experience for anything. And it's an important entry in my timeline. I didn't get it when all my classmates were getting their college degrees. I was determined to be happy on my $1.85 at Alpena Savings Bank, $1.85 an hour at Alpena Savings Bank, $113 every 2 weeks. I figured, you know, I'm going to be so far ahead of all those people, they're not going to believe it. Well, I'm sure they got ahead of me pretty fast, but you know, I look at Judy here. Her mom used to teach next classroom. I was talking to my brother a couple of years ago. He said, you know, my favorite teacher was Judy's mom.
Well, thank you.
And I didn't have her for a teacher. They divided up the 2nd grade. I had the other teacher, and so I never had her for a teacher. So I have no idea what caused that to happen, but my brother said my 1st grade teacher was my favorite teacher.
Well, thank you.
So I'm open to questions if you have questions.
I don't have a question. This is Judy. I don't have a question, but a comment. I was always interested in genealogy and family history, and I was very close to my grandfather, so tracked back quite a bit on my mother's side, and I'm just getting into documentation on my dad's side. But fortunately, I'm somewhere along the line, our family, the MacArthurs and the Lumsdens, crossed tracks with the Hansens. So I do get a copy of that absolutely awesome weekly newsletter that you do. And especially even before COVID, that is the greatest connection of keeping families together, as now we live such extended lives away from our home base. I love that weekly newsletter, catching up on who's doing what. And I don't know how you keep track of all the information, Mark. You do an awesome job with it, and the family pictures, and you look and see the resemblances and how the genes pass along. And you're right. It does give you a sense of happiness just to know where your roots were. And I think it's becoming more and more apparent that we all need to know where our roots are. So keep up that good work. I love it.
That'll be
it kind of stimulated me to do a little bit more serious working on the timeline for my own children.
Oh, I think that's huge. Just don't leave George out, okay? Don't leave your dad and his brother out. Those two aren't.
Yes.
I would never go to a MacArthur gathering where I couldn't have Dave take off on some stories. And
this is true.
You were in for a real treat. Wow.
Yep.
They're not here anymore to share those stories, but
I have a question. I'm writing a book about Camp Carefree, which was a camp for young women in Bell, in the Presqu'île community, from 1922 to 1927. And it was moved in 1928 over to Lake Charlevoix. So it was a camp for 18 years. It was created by the University of Michigan's first official photographer. He was a photographer for the U of M from 1913 to the day he died in 1947. And I have copies, the only copy of the camp's literary journals from 1926. The young women at the camp, the campers and the counselors and the managers contributed all kinds of things, stories, fiction stories, nonfiction reports, jokes, plays for scripts for plays, lyrics for songs, poetry, drawings, a couple of photographs. And every Sunday, they would convene everybody together on the porch of the lodge, which is where the old fireplace is at Bell, the Bell Natural area. That fireplace is from the lodge, from the girls' camp in the 1920s. But in those journals is listed every young woman who was at that camp that year. And I originally intended to trace their history to find out how that camp experience affected them. This would have been just a few years before the Great Depression. They would have lived without a lot of modern conveniences, no electricity, no phones, no running water, all kinds of stuff like that. And I have found out some aspects of that life, but my biggest obstacle is finding the names that they acquired when they got married. I always had their maiden name. And it seems like the most success I had was identifying their parents, particularly their father. And they might be mentioned as going to a memorial service, a funeral for a father or a grandfather. But there are so many of about 30, 40 names that I would like to find more about, but I've just hit dead ends. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas for how you get around maiden names.
That's a tough one. For years, they wouldn't even acknowledge the mom's name. She'd be Mrs. Finally, they started to realize that, moms had names, and now a lot of the funeral homes and a lot of the obituaries do have the maiden name too, which is a big help. But,
that's very true. The Bentley Library at the U of M has 34 boxes of archives from George Swain, who was that photographer, and all of his letters to his wife, who was running the camp in 1924 and 1925, when he accompanied Professor Kelsey in the Middle East on archaeological expeditions. He would write back and tell her to interview so-and-so for a counselor job, what's the latest about our property dispute with the owner, all this kind of stuff. But yet all of the advertisements, the marketing that was done to entice parents to send their daughters and to market to these young women they all mention Mrs. George Swain. They never say Edith Swain, her real name.
Were all these kids coming from Alpena, or were they coming from all over the state, or?
All over the state and actually all over the Midwest, but mostly from Michigan. They issued a booklet every year, which was used to market the camp to prospective campers and their parents. And on one of the last pages, they named parents that others could contact who had sent their daughters to the camp. And the parents are separated in categories, regular and university professors. So they list about, each one of these booklets lists about 10 to a dozen U of M professors who have sent their daughters. And at the top of the page are about 30 or 40 regular people.
Are there any Alpena people at all?
There was a young woman with a last name of Fletcher, and I've not been able to determine if she was a local person or not. Interestingly, one of the young women who became a counselor in her later years association with the camp wrote her master's dissertation. The University of Chicago, in the Department of Geography, they called their master's work a dissertation. And she wrote about the geographical influences on Alpena economy. And, you know, some distance from Chicago. She didn't live up here,
right?
But apparently she got enough information and enough intrigue from the area to play it further.
Wow. I mean, obviously Fletcher's a big name in Alpena, but boy, it's hard to give you a good suggestion there. I mean, you're obviously aware of the Bentley Library, which is it's an interesting place to go to, if for no other reason than to just go there. And
my first real clue was finding that this photographer had taken hundreds and hundreds of photos here at the camp and at the camp on Lake Charlevoix, but there was only one photo print in his 34 boxes of archives. And I wrote a book about Presque Isle that was published in 2015. And in doing that, located a great-granddaughter of his who loaned me a 92-year-old family photo album with 250 photos of his from Presque Isle, from the Bell area. I forget where I was going with that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So what was the name of this camp again?
Camp with a K, Carefree, K-A-I-R-P-H-R-E-E. And there are other Camp Carefrees in the United States. There's one currently operating in Connecticut, has been going for about 15 or 20 years. There was a scout camp in Missouri with that name. There was a camp in Wisconsin with that name, and then the two here in Michigan. The same camp, two locations.
You said it was K-A-I-R-P-H-R-E-E?
That's right.
Okay. I had never heard of it. There was a camp out, I can't think of the name of it. There was maybe an Episcopalian camp, maybe, out off of Grand Lake, or?
Yeah, I was a camper there for 4 years and on the staff for 3. Beginning in 1959.
At the camp that I'm referring to?
Camp Chickasha.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still operating.
Okay.
It began in 1929, 2 years after the last year for Camp Carefree in Bell.
Mm-hmm. Did you, I mean, it's so hard to, you know, you can say, well, they operated, you know, they must have been in the Alpena News, but you're looking at a 365 Alpena Newses or whatever per year in microfilm, and well, one of us has enough energy to sit and go through that. So
yeah, let me just briefly explain what got me going on the genealogical aspect of this. One of the campers' names was Iva Ostrander, in 1926. And I Googled that name and I found a picture from the Mississippi newspaper of that woman's daughter in 1967. She was attending a dedication ceremony for a sorority dormitory at the University of Southern Mississippi, as I recall. And her father was there, she was there, her mother had died. Iva Ostrander had died, but she was so esteemed at that university as a dean of women for years. She had taken this camp experience, camp counselor, continued with a human services orientation, became a dean of women, and they named a dormitory after her. Well, this photo gave me the name of the daughter, and I've been in touch with her ever since. She's well into her 80s. She's an academic audiologist, an audiology professor, worked at 2 or 3 different universities. So that was the first luck of finding someone with a fairly unusual name. There were many unusual first names that have sometimes led to some success in finding these people.
Oh, that's fascinating. I've never heard of it. You would think some records maybe had gone when I went to Charlevoix, some records would have gone across, but to figure out whether you can get your hands on those records, or I mean, I've been in the courthouse at Alpena quite a few years ago now, you know, and you have, you know, baby boy and then the last name, and there's no first name written, you know, these are hand entered books, and then you'll see a line through a name or something and another name's written down. I thought, you know, I could go through here and change names. I mean, I'm in here alone. I mean, it's like, you know, what's factual and what's not factual, but we try to.
It's also the spelling of names is problematic in some cases. My co-author for our book has been researching a house fire in 1927 off East Grand Lake Road. And the story is that a young mother and a 1-year-old child died in a house fire while the father was working at Rockport. He arrived home to find that his house had burned and some neighbors had taken them to McRae Hospital in Alpena where they died. And the mother's name was Beulah. Well, he was the person who gave the information about her name and, you know, year of birth and all this. But on her death certificate, it's B-U-L-A. But we know that it's B-E-U-L-A-H is the proper spelling. And there was one aspect of the death certificate, baby boy LeBlanc, you know, and it was Merlin actually. But there were 2 different spellings for Merlin, depending on who was giving the information, how distraught they were, and what was written down from what they had said.
Yeah, it's fascinating where these things will take you, and obviously you have a great understanding of that. I have a huge database here. I know that there's been over 20,000 obituaries in the Alpena News since the year 2001.
Wow.
And a lot of times we don't think about that because you look at it and there's 3 today and 7 tomorrow and all that stuff. But I have a spreadsheet of it. Because the books that I found so valuable aren't continued anymore. So I thought, well, I'll do this myself. So, you know, I'm still a subscriber to the Alpena News. I get it digitally, and I have Word docs that have all the obituaries in it. If I find out somebody died in 2003, I can go to my own files and find a 2003 obituary pretty darn fast and throw it in my family tree stuff. Well, my family tree stuff is way beyond immediate family. I'm approaching 80,000 names. And so it's you can, like I said, you can call it addictive or something, but you run into these stories like you're mentioning, we drive these roads every day, or we live this life, we live this dash every day that takes us different directions. And, when you start talking to this lady who's over 80 years old and it comes all the way back to this camp, I mean, that's got to be I don't know if you want to call it a bingo or whatever, but in the genealogy world, when you can put two families together, it's pretty cool. It's like, oh, I never even thought about that. I'm a Facebook friend with my 8th grade teacher, and I don't remember her in the 8th grade, but I'm sure I was a typical boy in the 8th grade. You listened, as to where to hang your coat up, and then you kind of zoned out for the rest of the day. The young ladies in the class were getting good grades, and we were, who knows? I was watching the trees burning over in the woods, and they were building M65. But her parents owned land that was just kitty corner from my parents. She said, "Yeah, I have Long Rapids roots." I thought, well, you live out in Long Lake, but there's no reason why there couldn't be a connection here. And that picture I had of the 1903 plat book, sure enough, there's her grandfather's name out there with, was land out in Long Rapids, and she probably mentioned it, and I just wasn't listening. It was, but the stories are just, incredible. I was reading a Facebook entry this morning. One of the kids that I knew in the Spartan marching band is from Alpena, and his teacher, the teacher that he really liked, is retiring. And I wrote back to him, I'm writing back to this kid who just graduated from Michigan State a couple of years ago. I said, "Kelsey," I said, "you're making me feel old here when you're saying that your favorite teacher was the son of my history teacher when I went to high school." Well, Dennis Dobek. So, and I thought maybe I'd see Gordon and Kate Breckenridge on here today. Mr. Breckenridge was always another history teacher. I never had him for a teacher, but I really enjoyed
Mr. Breckenridge. Oh, my God. I
really enjoy reading the posts that he and his wife have back and forth. I mean, a couple that's had a great life and enjoying life today. And I wish my parents were here doing the same thing, but they're not. So
they were actually on the program yesterday.
They were. Yep. I saw them yesterday.
Yep.
Yep.
Who, that's Mr. Breckenridge?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
Uh-oh.
I had Mr. Breckenridge. There we go.
I never knew his wife, and I was up, the last time I was in Alpena, which was about 5 years ago. It's way too long. I need to get back home. But I was taking pictures of the Duck Island Bridge because I love that bridge. I thought, this is so cool for Alpena. And I was down there at 6 o'clock in the morning taking pictures of the bridge shortly thereafter. And the Alpena Flower Club is out there working on flowers or something. And Kate was probably out there, while I was tripping over the Alpena Flower Club trying to get the angle of the picture that I wanted. She was probably out there. I had no idea. But
oh my gosh.
It's just I don't know. I strongly advocate the fact that if you get to know your family, but in this case, as John points out, sometimes those families go in different directions. I see 80 kids leave the Spartan marching band every fall, and it's one of the hardest weeks I have as a photographer is to say goodbye to these kids that I've been taking pictures of and visiting with in the stands for 4 years of their college career. And now after doing that for 16 years, I'm walking by kids that have families today. I'd say, "Hey, Mr. Hansen." And I look at them and I go, "Oh, wait a minute. There's a tuba and a trumpet." "Oh yeah, that's right. My daughter married a drummer." So, okay, there's a mellophone and a drummer. People do get married in these organizations, but it's a family. And I just contend that it's so important that you don't lose track of that family side of things and where it'll take you. It's good stuff. Jodine, your husband used to hunt out at my parents' property, so. Yes,
for sure.
And you have to develop a tolerance for dead ends, I think.
Yep.
This fellow that worked at Rockport lived in Onaway. He's buried in Presque Isle County, lived in Presque Isle County. but he happened to die at work just across the county line in Sheboygan County. So Sheboygan County has the death certificate. We finally found out.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
it's
you got to
almost like you have to have somehow be able to cope with all the losses. You know, when you know that many people and you're connected to that huge sprawling tree, how do you cope with all those losses?
Well, I think I suppose in losing my wife and caregiving for her for 4 years, you know, we're really, when a doctor walks in and says your wife has a brain tumor, and, you know, literally 6 or 8 hours earlier, you said goodbye to each other in the morning and said, have a good day at work. And that night you're in the emergency room and she has a mass on her brain. The next day we were supposed to be taking pictures of the Michigan State Marching Band at the big house. And all of a sudden your life just takes a complete twist, a real twist. And as she said, you know, I now have to do things that I had to work with my patients with for years to get them to do, and now I have to do them. And so I think you start to learn some things about loss. And, you know, the fact that I lost my parents in 2015 and my wife had the cancer thing came down in 2015 also, that was a crappy year. But
absolutely. So sorry. That's a lot to handle.
It was a lot to handle, but, you know, last year, you know, I retired in May last year. In March of last year, I started working at home because of COVID. So I had already, you know, it'd been 6 months or so since my wife passed away. So that's your first loneliness. Then all of a sudden you're working at home all the time. Then you retire. COVID. It's like, you know, I've got grandkids I haven't seen for a year and a half right now. And just now as things start to open up, I look forward to being a grandpa again. But, you know, you start looking at this loss thing because a lot of families have lost a lot of ground right now because they, you know, the fact that you can't hug your mom. If I couldn't have seen my wife at a long-term care home because of COVID,
right.
I don't know how I would have coped with that. I could go see her in the morning, which I did. I worked in the afternoon. I went back to see her in the evening. I could hug her goodbye. She could look in my eyes, which she did one day. She says, "Why are you crying?" I said, "I'm going to miss you." And she looked at me and she said, "You'll be fine." I thought, well, why are you telling me this? What makes you think that I'll be fine? But, you know, we had been to the Rose Bowl together. The Spartan marching band. Yeah, she was a psychologist. I was a banker. Both on Saturdays, we were at Spartan Stadium. We were taking pictures of the marching band. We were able to enjoy that something special together. So there's a lot of, you know, if you can separate the richness, the loss is hard. There's no question about that. But, and I really feel like when I did my timeline, which might have been after she passed away, you start to look at things. And the fact that I decided to leave college after my freshman year and go to work at Alpena Savings Bank, you know, that was all going to cycle back later on when I sat in a room with my 56 credits of what college I had up to that point. I sat there with 56 credits. I needed 60 credits to get into the accelerated program. And I was sitting around people that said, well, I got 190, I got 130, I got 120. We just never had it focused on anything. And you know, I have 56. Time out. I left there disappointed. I thought, you know, this isn't going to work. And the counselor called me back the next day and she said, I think we can make this work for you. I'll talk to the dean. You agree to take a couple classes. I'll talk to the dean. I think we can get this to work for you.
Great.
She made a huge difference. Because I went and took those couple classes and then I went to school almost 5 nights a week for a couple of years, along with working. And, you know, the fact that my wife wouldn't give me 3 years of her doctorate, so I could add that to my freshman year, we both had bachelor's degrees. She said, no, you have to go back to school. I thought, oh, great. Well, it was such a rich time. And when you look at that on the timeline, you say, well, I left college or high school in 71. Here I am in my 50s. But oh my goodness, the music at that graduation was better than any graduation I've been at in my life. And so if I'm, sitting in the funeral for my mom, I'm looking down the pew as this last hymn was being sung. My dad starts to keel over. And I thought, what? I'm gonna lose dad now? And I look down there and the dad looks at me and he said, can we do that last verse again?
Oh.
Dad. Oh my gosh, I thought, I just watched my dad greet everybody come into the funeral. Where on earth does that happen? He sits back at the back door and he greets everybody as they come into the funeral. But Dad wanted to be there so badly. He wanted to make sure that he saw Mom to the end, and he did. Wow. And he had a bad scare a couple months before, and I think that worried him a lot. And the fact that he could be there to take care of Mom to the end meant the world to him. So, brace yourself for life. I mean, I have a person who says, somebody he knew, he said the problem with life is that it's daily. And my goodness, there's a lot of truth to that. It's like, I have no idea if I'm going to be here for supper. I don't know, but if I'm living my dash, I know I'm here right now and it's 3:12 in the afternoon. I'm still here. Maybe I'll be here for supper. Maybe I ought to start thinking about what to have for supper, but.
I'm not the ambassador for the Association of Lifelong Learners per se, but I've been around it for quite a while, worked in it for quite a while. And I know from experience that being part of it as you are now, you've joined in with us, and there's a group of people who are really willing to be friends and supports, and there's just a plethora, I guess you could say, of opportunities within the lifelong learners for support and friendships. And there's a lot of people that would, I know, agree with me that people that did lose spouses or did have issues in their life where they needed that person or those people who'd stand up for them or be with them. And so I'm glad you're part of ALL, Mark, and I'm glad we're just so happy to have you.
Well, it's, my dad was a trustee of Alpena Community College for 22 years. And I know how much that meant to him. Here's this farm guy.
Mm-hmm.
He took that job very seriously, and he was such a great friend of Dr. Newport's. And it turned out that the uncle that I mentioned, or my great uncle who was in the Michigan Marching Band in 1935, Dr. Newport had done some work with Dr. Clyde Roman, who's his name, when he did some things down here at the U of M. It's just fun to see how life cycles around and to be able to see that and feel that. And I feel in some ways I feel for kids today because some are actually reaching out. They want to know more about their families, and it's trying to figure out how to accomplish that. Now, I do have a newsletter that I put out every week, and so if somebody's sick in the family, their picture might magically show up, but I don't say anything about them being sick because I respect the fact that privacy is an important issue. But I can also put a picture out there for their family 20 years ago or something like that, and so people might stop and think about that family a little bit in their thoughts. They're not thinking about the fact that that person's maybe in surgery or maybe fighting for their life, but they're thinking about that family. And so I can use that forum a little bit in ways that hopefully can help the family, but it is a lot of work. I won't dispute that, but I can't argue with the richness of it. And when I think back to my aunt doing all this work for years and years and years and years, how did she do it? Well, she did it with a pencil and a paper. And so when somebody said, well, you referred to baby boy one or something like that, you go home. Well, now darn it, I did it in ink. I've got to rewrite the whole sheet. You know, I come home and I replace the name and I put a new sheet on. She wouldn't believe the way I do this stuff today compared to how she did it, but thank goodness she did it.
For sure.
And, you know, the nurse when I was delivered as a baby, the nurse, I don't know if you know Anna Mae Bubaltz, she passed away a few years ago. She was a huge genealogist, knew a lot of history. Oh my gosh. But she was the attending nurse the day I was born. For Dr. Heyer. If you knew Dr. Heyer, the name might be familiar. You may know some of the kids today. Stephen, I think, is one, and some of the other Heyer kids. Well, their dad was my mom's doctor. But it's just incredible, the stories that are out there, and I think you become a better person when you learn some of this stuff.
And the linkages, my gosh.
I mean, even the Depression, you know, it's my grandfather as a captain, he kept ship for 4 years during the Depression. So my dad and my aunt and my grandma and my grandpa lived on a ship in the Maumee River in Toledo and South Chicago. He was high enough in the hierarchy so that he would have a ship to watch. There was nothing to ship because the economy wasn't there. But Dad and his sister went to school off the boat. And when there was enough for a load or a few loads, something like that, then they would load up the trailer. Sort of sounds like the Beverly Hillbillies. They'd load up the trailer, move everything back to Alpena, live up there for a few weeks until Grandpa said, well, I'm back in the river again. We'll move back down here. So Dad goes back to Toledo, or Aunt Lorraine goes back to Toledo, or they go to Chicago to school for a while. And, oh no, now we're going back to Alpena again. I mean, it's just crazy. It's a crazy life.
Well, we're glad you're back to Alpena again.
Oh my, yes. We are the beneficiaries.
So it's great, but it'll always be my hometown, even though I've been in Ann Arbor for more than I was in Alpena. But thank goodness for Zoom.
Yeah,
that's true.
So I don't have many more suggestions for your camp. I'm going to have to do some nosing around, I guess. I'm fascinated by this camp. It had to get some publicity somewhere along the line.
Somewhere.
But
who knows? Someone may watch this recording and have some answer for John. You never know how things, will happen, like you pointed out.
I can cross my fingers because those kinds of things will happen. Even going to a reunion a few years ago, a guy came up to me and said, I have a picture for you. It's a picture of the concrete mixer when my great-grandfather was building the bridge in Hillman. It's the concrete mixer they were using to put the double back bridge together in Hillman, which is of course gone now. But I thought, wow, it's a great picture to have. Even though I never knew my great-grandfather, but yeah, he paved Washington Street. The barn that's out at the farm on M65, my dad and my great-grandfather and my uncle took apart. It was on Campbell Street in Alpena to store his paving and construction equipment. They took it all apart, board by board, moved it all out to the farm. That barn's standing on the farm today.
Oh my gosh.
Will you share your email address, Mark?
Yeah, you can hit me at Lear, L-E-E-R. It's going to sound familiar. Now it's going to get crazy. Lofoten, L-O-F-O-T-E-N. My great-grandmother was born in Lofoten Islands in Norway. At gmail.com. If you don't like Gmail, you can use Lofoten Lear and you can use Yahoo.
And would you spell that again, please?
Yeah, it's L-E-E-R. So
yeah.
Lear is a community in northern Alpena County.
Oh, yeah.
Where I grew up. And then Lofoten, L-O-F-O-T-E-N at gmail.com.
Okay.
But to take that story, I was sitting in church one day and I was talking to a lady. She said, boy, that was really incredible, whatever was mentioned. And I said, well, I said, my grandmother was born in Lofoten Islands. She looked at me and she says, my friend and I have hiked all over the Lofoten Islands. And what I would give to just to visit the Lofoten Islands. For my great-grandmother at 15 years old, her dad said, yeah, it's okay to go to America. Now, well, I had two girls. I don't think I could stand it the bank of the Detroit River and say, yeah, it's okay to go to Windsor. I mean, how on earth did he do this at 15 years old? Well, he's buried here in Lear, so maybe he came here to make sure that his daughter, I mean, there were other daughters, but make sure they all got here. I don't know.
Wow.
It's just incredible. So yeah, learlafountain@gmail.com will get to me.
The museum in Lear is well worth a visit.
Oh, Linda, I'll call her Linda Christofferson. Their property was right backed up to our property on M65. They were on Lear Road. Mm-hmm. But Linda is, she's a great lady.
Yeah.
A wonderful lady. She's
okay, you guys, I have to leave because I got another commitment and I hate to miss out on 3 words that you're going to share after I get off here. But
I'm going to go enjoy your commitment. How's that? That's 3 words.
It's been a wonderful program, Mark. Words. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights and inspiring me to get my napkins out and start writing a little bit more, I guess. So
yeah, please, please do that.
All right.
Thank you, Marks. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. Thanks, Judy.
You're welcome, Mark. Have a good afternoon.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you, Judy, for all the things you do to make these happen.
Oh, you guys are all welcome.